All right, Michael Bashkin, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Robbie. Thanks for having me on today.
You bet. Let me just check your mic real quick. Say something for me there again, Michael.
Hello, Robbie. How you doing?
Okay. Hello, folks. Robert O'Brien here from Parker, Colorado, the O'Brien Guitars Workshop, and I'm following on my YouTube here on the iPad. I got Michael Baskin. He's our special guest here today, and hopefully this will go off without a glitch here, but you never know. We did some testing during the week and had some funny things happen. Let's just acknowledge everybody here that's shown up here on YouTube. We got Peter Burrows taking a break from that Curly Sapelli. We got Steve Foss that looks like he got his honey-do list there done today. Welcome aboard, Steve. And Mr. Redmond from Flagstaff, Arizona. Rob McAllister, ready for some awesome tips. Well, you come to the right place because Michael Baskin has a lot of awesome tips. We got Drew Boyd streaming from Florida today. Wow. Look at that. Let's see. Scrolling on down here, we got a person from Brazil. Oh, I don't have any coffee today, Georgie. I'm sorry about that. Had a little excitement here today. We almost caught the house on fire, so I don't have any plugs in my kitchen right now. Got to install a new couple outlets up there. We got Richard from San Diego, Mr. Strickland or somebody Strickland from Oceanside, Havana, Florida, Scott McKee from Vancouver Island, Moby from the UK, Staffen from Italy, and let's see, Spokane, Washington. My gosh, Windsor, Ontario, Jacksonville, Southern Oregon, Longmont, Colorado, Steve Foss, Curitiba, Brazil, Omaha, Nebraska, another person from Colorado, New York, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Toronto, Yuma, Arizona. My God, you guys get the idea real quick that technology is pretty amazing these days, what we can do. Well, let's get going here. We don't want to take all our time just talking about where everybody's from. If you have any questions, folks, go ahead and put them in the chat box here on YouTube. I'll be monitoring that here on my iPad, and I'll be up to feed those over to Michael because Michael can't see those questions. Also, if you like the content, even if you don't like the content, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you hit the little bell symbol there, little bell icon, it will set you up for notifications. And every time I go live, then you can be notified and dial right in. So I highly recommend that. This is a new thing I've started here in the last few weeks called Shop Talk with O'Brien Guitars. And we've got a lot to talk about, especially since Michael Baskin's here. Michael, thank you for being with us here today.
Sure thing, Robbie.
Michael and I did some work together here a few years ago. We did a neck reset course. It's an online course available via my website. Highly recommended. There's a surprise ending, and that alone is worth the price of admission. That was Michael's idea. So you guys check out the surprise ending there. Also, we did a fretwork course here a few weeks ago. It's been very well received on the website. In fact, last week, Michael, I don't know if you were able to dial in, but I talked about fretting tools and some things that I use. And we did that during Shop Talk. Oh, there's Duke. Hey,
There's
Duke.
Duke.
Hey, buddy. Oh, and my wife's bringing something down here for me. This is kind of a tradition here, Michael, where my wife will bring either some coffee or something down for me. Camera's over here, Adriana.
I'm feeling kind of left out.
Well, what do we have? Oh, we got some apple with some chocolate on it here. Boy, that looks really good, Michael.
No Brazilian cheese balls?
No Brazilian cheese bread or balls today, but maybe in the future here. But you got a cup of coffee there, right, Michael?
I do. Of
okay.
Course.
Let's see. Keeping my wood at 40 to 50% difficult when it's 5%. Any tips? Well, let's just start right off with a question. What do you think, Michael? Then we'll go into a little bit of your background and your shop and all that kind of stuff. This is John. He says that he's keeping the wood at 40 to 50%, but it's very difficult when it's 5%. So he must live in a very dry area. You got any tips for that, Michael?
Yes. Well, I live in a dry area too, Colorado. I have a shop humidification system that works pretty well. I made my own humidifier. I got about it's probably about a 33-gallon container, very heavy plastic. I bought a ultrasonic atomizer from House of Hydro, and you can get I think everything from 1 to 12 discs in terms of the number of atomizers. It comes with a humidistat that automatically kicks it on and off, And that's how I keep my shop and my wood humidified. And Robbie, I think maybe you did a tips video on that a couple of years ago. I'm not sure.
I did a tips video on that, and my ultrasonic mist maker actually burned out this week.
Oh,
I've had two of them burn out.
hmm
And so I bought one off Amazon and got here in a couple of days and plugged it right in. And man, this place is like a discotheque now with all the fog in here. But I have no problem keeping it between 40 and 50% now. So
yeah.
that's a great tip. Let's see. Going back to the questions here. Let's just see. Keeping my wood. Welcome, Michael. How do you treat truss rods in steel string guitars? Shim, glue, silicone cock, etc. That came from Tony.
All right, Tony. If you're talking about how I treat them, how I install them, then I do put a cap on top, a very thin wooden cap. It usually ends up probably being about no more than a 32nd of an inch. I typically just use mahogany, and and then I also like to put a couple dabs of silicone glue. It's really silicone caulking, I think, is probably more
siliconized
correct.
caulk probably.
Yeah, and I put a couple, like maybe 3 pretty big dabs in the channel, one in the middle and one at both ends of the truss rod. The truss rods I use are made by Mark Blanchard. I highly recommend them. They're excellent rods. And they probably wouldn't rattle, but I'd like to have the silicone in there just as an insurance policy. It does mean that the rod's a little bit harder to turn, but I think it's worth having the insurance of not having the rod rattle. So yes, I do use a cap and I use some silicone in the channel itself.
Perfect. All right. So we've answered a couple of questions. Why don't we, I want Michael just to talk just real quick about his background. Now, I know that Michael had a background in forestry, and the jump from forestry to guitar building is not a very long jump because, you know, it's wood and it's related. So as Michael just kind of elaborates on that, he just wants to talk about that quickly. As he elaborates on that, what I'm going to do is get down to my broadcast software. I'm going to throw up a few pictures here of back in your forestry days, Michael. And this is
right.
when you had hair. So, Michael, you can't see this on your end unless you're following along on YouTube. And
is everybody sitting down? Because this might be shocking.
Well, actually, I don't think I have any close-up pictures of you. You're just group shots of all the people.
All
But
right.
what I'm showing here, and you can't see this on your end, Michael, unless you're following along on YouTube. But I just had a great big forest of eucalyptus trees, and Michael spent a lot of time in Belize and doing forestry management and that kind of stuff. So I'm just flashing a few pictures up here, Michael, as you go ahead and elaborate on that.
Sure. Actually, I can't see the pictures. The first picture was from a eucalyptus plantation in Australia that actually my graduate advisor took. I was studying tropical forestry and eucalyptus plantations in Hawaii. So similar type of setting. And I was just using those pictures to illustrate the point that plantation forest management is much more productive in terms of wood fiber produced per acre than the native forests. And it's not the two are not equal. They do very different things. Native forests have a lot of other ecosystem services, as we like to call them, in terms of wildlife, watershed protection, carbon storage, etc. But in terms of producing wood fiber, especially with a fast-growing species like eucalyptus. The eucalyptus in that picture were probably maybe 6 to 10 years old. So the growth rates in the right climate with the right management can be really pretty astounding.
Yeah. I remember when I lived in Brazil, we used to see a lot of eucalyptus plantation type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, it just grows incredibly fast. I mean, from one day to the next, it grows quite a bit. What I'm doing now is just flashing up a few pictures here of the sawmill. I guess that's there in Belize.
Yeah, that's in southern Belize down by Punta Gorda.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a very large international mill. And then there's also some pictures from a much smaller local sawmill, which I think is up on the screen right now. And the local sawmill was, not surprisingly, just mostly cutting for the domestic market, variety of different species. You can see they had one big circular saw, whereas the international mill had several big band saws or breakdown saws, and they were cutting a lot of timber for export. They also had on-site kilns too.
Right. Amazing stuff. Let me just check the chat box here to see if we got any questions about that.
Sure.
Let's see. Oh, Steve Foss says he's built your humidifier and it works great. I did do a YouTube video on that if anybody wants to find that. Let's see. Somebody else, Scott McKee, has built one. It's awesome. Lots of whales nearby too.
Mhm.
Let's see. Nope, no more questions about that. Greetings from Italy. We got somebody else from Italy. Very nice. All right, let me just pop another picture up here on the screen, Michael. And
Okay.
what I'm looking at on my end is a little shed. It looks like in the backyard there behind a house. I'll let you elaborate on that, Michael.
Yeah, that was my first shop in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I know you. I know you're probably thinking that I was so lucky to have this massive shop, but actually, I only had half of it. I split it with a potter, and yeah, so that was my first shop. I've also worked out of my closet for a while.
There you go.
I've had lots of home shops, but now I'm fortunate where I rent an industrial space and have quite a bit of space, which I've managed to completely fill up over the years. So
That's right.
um,
I think that shop space is kind of like time and money. It doesn't matter how much you have,
mhm.
you'll always use it all.
Ah,
You know,
absolutely,
if you have a
absolutely.
very small shop, then that's what you'll be used to using, and you'll use it all. If
Mhm.
you have a very large shop, then you'll fill that space up too. It's like time and money.
Yeah.
I got one more picture, I think, here. I'm inside your little shed shop there now with the door open, kind of looking out. And then I got
Hmm.
one more that has a bender on the bench there. It looks like your own design there, special shape. But yeah, you had to work very efficiently. It looks like to work in that shop.
Yeah, you might be giving me more credit than I was due. I was just figuring things out. I wouldn't use the word efficient. That was back in probably 1994, maybe 95.
Way back in the beginning, huh?
So yeah, yeah. So I was just getting started.
Well,
So
fantastic. All right, I'm going to check our chat box here. Let's see if we got a few more
okay.
questions. So we've covered quickly Michael Baskin's forestry management background and showed you a few pics there of his time in Belize. And then we have also talked about his beginnings there with his little shop in the backyard. And let's see. Sorry, folks. I got to keep looking down off camera here. So greetings from Italy, Scott McKee. Unreal. I'd love to see some orcas in the wild. Oh, I guess they're chatting amongst themselves. I guess we can just go
Ah,
home now, Michael. They're chatting amongst themselves here.
I guess we're boring them.
There we go. Isn't eucalyptus wood pretty worthless due to the twisting growth? I'll let you analyze that, Michael. What do you think? Is eucalyptus useless?
Uh, well, for guitars, yeah. But my involvement in forestry at that point, I wasn't working with guitar wood at all. So the eucalyptus was really just about producing wood fiber,
Hmm.
either for pulp,
Hmm.
which is to make paper,
Right,
paper products,
right.
or actually in some of the plantations I was working in Hawaii, they were using it to burn to generate electricity.
Yep.
So now, from what I understand, there's dozens of different species of eucalyptus. There's quite a bit of variability. So I have come across a couple of guitars made out of eucalyptus, but I haven't made one myself. I don't know that there's a eucalyptus species that would be stable enough or appropriate for guitar making.
Right.
So good point.
Okay. Let's see. Tony, I've seen Sinker mahogany from Belize advertised as an excellent tone wood. Any thoughts on its use? Sinker mahogany from Belize?
Yeah, I'm going to punt on that one. I have not built a guitar with sinker mahogany, so I just don't have any personal experience with it. Do you, Robbie?
I don't. Some of my students have brought in the sinker woods and we've worked with it.
Hmm.
I don't think it's the holy grail. It's kind of like torrefied wood. People think that they're always looking for that magic, whatever to make the perfect guitar. And, I tell people all the time ask me, hey, which is better, Brazilian or Indian rosewood? And I said, well, I've heard a lot of bad sounding Brazilian rosewood guitars, a lot of good sounding Indian rosewood guitars. Same thing with Singer wood. I've heard some bad sounding, I've heard some good sounding. Same thing with
Mhm.
Torrefied wood. I've heard some bad sounding, I've heard some good sounding. So there's no magic formula, I guess you could say, but I'm not opposed to it. I just never used it. I'm like you, Michael. I personally have never used it. Let's see. John, back to the shop issue here in Yuma, Arizona. He says he's got an 8x12 shop. It's amazing what you can do when you have to.
Yes.
And my experience has been that the smaller the shop, the more efficient you have to work. So that helps. Uh, let's see. These questions, the scrolls go up so quick. Sometimes I got to backtrack here. Working
Gotcha.
on my first guitar, and I'm building it out of figured cherry. Would you recommend using the figured cherry for the top? And also, would you also use the cherry for the bracing? Any ideas, Michael?
Yes, I would not recommend using figure cherry for the top because the figure is essentially just exhibiting localized and intense runout in the wood.
Hmm.
And, in general, I think guitar makers over the last century and a half have decided that clean quarter sawn wood is appropriate, although bear claw and spruce can be quite popular, and essentially that's figure also. But cherry is also a very dense wood,
Hmm.
uh, pretty dense for a guitar top. So depending on the tone you want, that it might be a pretty clear sounding, maybe not very responsive guitar. I would not use it for the braces either because it would be very hard to carve, and as a brace would, it just would seem to be overly dense and heavy and overkill to brace a guitar top.
All right. Here's a question from Drew Boyd. It says Robbie teaches a methodical set of steps to carve a neck. Works great. Can you discuss your method, general approach? You got any general approach, some tidbits of information for carving a neck, Michael?
Yeah, my general approach is I start with one large block that's usually, let's see, about 4 inches by 4 inches by 26 inches long. And so I get two necks out of it if I'm making a solid one piece neck, which I've been doing mostly these days.
Hmm.
I'll put a side template on the neck, just a side profile, trace that out with a pencil, go right to the bandsaw, and rough that out. Then I will true up the fretboard face. I'll mill out my truss rod slots or any carbon fiber. I should say slot. I'm not using two truss rods.
Right.
So truss rod, carbon fiber, and then usually I'll do the mortise and tenon at the neck joint at this point. And once I'm at that point, I'll glue on the fingerboard and cut the taper of the mahogany down to the fingerboard very close. And then I'll just start carving on it with rasps, maybe a spoke shave or a block plane. I have a series of templates that tell me, my general shape at the first fret or at the 10th fret. And I'll carve those first 10th fret profiles first. And then essentially I'm just connecting the lines between the carving at the first fret and the 10th fret. So to date, that's how I've done all the necks in my guitars, is just using hand tools. And over the next couple of months, I'm going to try and see if I can pull this off on a CNC, or at least get a rough carve on a CNC. We'll see how it goes.
Nice. Are you doing a bolt-on neck, Michael?
I am. I do a bolt on, but it's not a full bolt on. Just the heel is bolted on, and then I glue the tongue of the fingerboard
Right.
onto the top of the guitar. So that would be similar to like a Collings neck
Right.
joint.
Right. Okay. Let's see. We got one from Patrick Harris. Michael, I read somewhere you have been using a modified X bracing pattern, but have moved to a more traditional X. Is this the case? And can you discuss the pros and cons of both? Boy, these questions are pretty advanced questions here, Michael. You up for this?
No, I'm going to sign off, but yeah, it's a big question. I would say modified in the sense that, I mean, even my guitar shapes are not Martin shapes. So just the fact that the um, guitar body, the depth, the outline is not strictly based on a Martin design, then that automatically changes some of the bracing. What I found personally for my guitars is I have a little bit of a wider splay on the X compared to a Martin guitar, so my bridge plates are a little bit longer. They're a little bit wider in width. They project more in front of the bridge and maybe less in back of the bridge than a Martin guitar. I do have two tone bars that come off the treble side of the X brace and go at pretty much the same angle as Martin guitars, although I've played with the spacing a bit. And I've been tapering out my braces more towards the edges. I've also done some of a lattice brace system behind the X, or behind the bridge plate between the X.
Right.
And yeah, they're all going to make differences for sure, pros and cons. Not really, because it just depends on the type of guitar you want to make. If you want to make a guitar that has say a scooped out mid-range and is really woody and punchy, then just the traditional Martin X is a great design. If you want something that's, I think, more responsive, then I do think there is something to opening up the X and tapering the braces down to almost nothing before they get into the linings.
All right.
So
if you don't want to answer this question, this is getting into intellectual property, that's fine. What do you put through all the way to the kerfing? Anything?
Yeah, I'll put through the upper arms of the X brace.
Okay.
I'll put through the upper transverse brace. And for years, I could even say decades, I would tuck the lower arms of the X brace. But probably in the last year and a half, I've kind of been leaving the lower arms of the X brace, where I've been feathering it out to almost nothing when it runs underneath the kerfing. All of my back braces are tucked into the kerfing as well.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Let's see, going down the questions here. I'm about to brace a back in a few hours. Any ideas, opinions on how to voice it when shooting for a live back? Oh, well, now we're getting into some technical Trevor Gore-ish type questions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one way you could think about a live back is to, there should be a certain number of semitone separation between the top and the back. And I think in general, if you're, 3 or 4 semitones, that's probably a good separation between the top and the back. If you're way above 4 semitones, your back's probably really stiff and would be dead, or I shouldn't say dead, reflective. It would be more of a reflective back. But if you want to get the back to interact with the top, then you probably want to stay within that range. In my experience, I'd probably over brace the back and leave your braces tall and thin. And then once you have the box constructed and you can actually start tapping on it, then go in through the sound hole and lower the height of the braces to get the pitch you want out of the back.
Nice.
Another thing you can do is also is to thin out the edge of the back, around the perimeter. Say you could probably go in between 20 and 30 millimeters, depending on your personal style, and that will give you a greater monopole movement on the back as well.
Perfect. Great answer, Michael. For those of you who want to study this further, Trevor Gore, friend of mine down in, actually a friend of Michael's too, down in Australia, has written a couple of great books on how to build a guitar, design and build your guitar, and then measure the responsiveness of it, and then manipulate those frequencies. Trevor has come to my shop every year for the last 3 years. We couldn't do it this year because of COVID. He couldn't get out of Australia, but it is planned for July of next year if you want to participate in that. Going on here. Since we're on the subject of woods here, have you had good experiences with Bacote wood? Now, depending on what day of the week it is, Michael, I pronounce that name differently. Bacote or Bacote? I'm not sure. How do you pronounce it?
Well, today's Sunday, so I say Bacote.
Bacote. Perfect. All right.
Yeah.
Have you worked with that wood?
I think I made a fingerboard out of it once,
Okay.
but that's the total depth of my experience with it. I think it would be fine for a guitar. I've actually seen it show up on guitars over the years.
Right.
So
I've got a beautiful classical guitar. I don't know if you can see in the background there, but the one on the far right there, on my left, I guess it'd be your right, is a classical guitar made out of Bacote or Bacote wood, and I coupled it with a cedar top, and it did fine. So I enjoy the sound. Going on down the questions here. Any comments on double top? I built one and it's very strong in response. You done any double tops, Michael?
I have not done any double tops. I have played them. I know several guitarists who own them, and just anecdotally, this is my take on it. Talking to people who own these and having played a couple, is that they're very powerful instruments. So if that's what you want out of a guitar, that's a good way to go. I think they could also be fairly stable. The cons of it is that I've heard is that they lack a certain maybe depth to the tone, or they don't open up like a regular guitar. So if anything, the pros is that they good volume, a lot of power. Cons might be a certain lack of a quality to the tone.
Right.
Now, I just want to finish that by saying I'm not a double top builder, so this is not coming from my own experience. This is more talking to other people.
I once heard a quote that was attributed to the classical guitarist John Williams when he started playing the Smallman double tops, and everybody was saying, "Well, hey, it's instant on." Volume, that's what you get. But what about the dynamics? He said, don't worry about that. I'll handle that. All right, here we go. Ronnie Owens has a question. I've been building harp guitars lately. If I want a continuous back bass side, I need wood 48 inches in length. Any good sources for tone woods that long? Wow, that's pretty long.
Yeah. Well, first of all, hey, Ronnie, nice to hear from you. I hope you're doing well and you have a good holidays. Ronnie's a local builder that we know each other. That's a tall order. I mean, you're not going to get 48-inch boards from your typical guitar suppliers. But what I have found is that if you call up, say, Adam at LMI and tell them what you're looking for, often they have boards that they haven't milled up yet that they're planning on cutting into guitar sets. So if you catch him, before they get to the chop saw, then he can definitely cut you up some harp guitar length sets. And local sources are always good if you can buy boards. The trick is just to know somebody with a resaw. And in your case, Ronnie, you do know somebody with a resaw, which is me. So I can cut it up for you.
There you go. All right.
All right.
Another question. Does Gonzalo Alves make a good tone wood? Have you ever used Gonzalo Alves?
No. And I always thought it was like goncal. I'm not going to embarrass myself.
I say Gonzalo just from the Spanish and the Portuguese. It usually has that C with the little tail on it, and that sounds like an S. So
right.
I may be pronouncing it wrong. I don't know. You may be right.
Okay. Well, when it comes to pronunciation, I'm never right.
Yeah.
So that's another wood where I have a big piece of it, and I acquired it, a long time ago. And every couple of years, I get into my wood storage and I pick this, beautiful block of this wood up that I can't pronounce. And I say, boy, someday this is going to be on a guitar. But I've never used it. I haven't used it for guitar. It seems like it would be perfect for bridges, fretboards. If you had a piece that was big enough, certainly backs and sides.
Good. Let's see. Moving on down the line here. Michael, are there any woods that you think would be great for guitars or guitar parts that you don't use for your guitars due to expectations, but you think would make great guitars? I don't know if, did you understand that one, Michael?
I think so. Well,
Okay.
yeah, well, it's a good point. I, my framework of thinking about guitars, especially guitar tops, would be that, um, like for example, mahogany or koa
Mhm.
would just be a bad idea for a guitar top. But I'll be the first person to tell you that I've played some great mahogany and koa top guitars. So I think that maybe my thinking about what could be a guitar top has been pretty narrowly focused on tradition. But yeah, I played some great mahogany koa top guitars. I'm sure there's some others out there. I think also same thing with backs and sides. We're pretty stuck in tradition, and uh, especially with a lot of double side construction, or even double backs. That there's a lot of possibilities in woods that we just don't use because we're not used to using them.
Right. Okay. Another question. Is there, let's see, I just lost the question. There it is. Is there a good recipe for choosing the scale length? Now, that's a good question.
Oh, recipe. Well, yeah, I think that the first place would be to play guitars with different scale lengths and find out, what feels comfortable to you. Most people are familiar with what we call standard scale, which is 25/4, or short scale 24/9. Gibsons are 25, and they really do feel different. So, there's a lot of other factors that scale lengths affect. Certainly beyond just the feel of the guitar and the spacing of the frets. I mean, short scale guitars, I think, sound different than standard scale guitars. So I would start just by playing guitars of different scales and seeing what feels right to you or your customer, and figuring out what kind of guitar you want to make. I build a lot of multi-scale or fan fret guitars because I can't make up my mind about what scale I want. So I have to have them both and everything in between. But when I'm thinking about a fan fret for a customer, we have a discussion in terms of what tunings are they using, what string gauges are they using, how to have enough length on the low E string so that if they're tuning down to say a B or a C, that it doesn't get floppy. So those are the kind of decisions that get into scale lengths.
Perfect. We've got another question here
Mm-hmm.
about neck shape. What do your clients ask more for, a D shape or a C shape of the neck profile?
Definitely more of a C shape.
C shape, yeah.
Yeah, I think I've only had requests for maybe one or two D shapes over the years. And I've also done kind of, I call it a very soft V shape,
Mhm.
which is probably my personal favorite and my standard neck. I will say though that neck shapes are very subjective, and
Right,
there really is no right answer on them.
right. And let's see. Oh, Giju has shown up here. He's from Korea. How you doing, Giju? I hope everything's okay over there in Korea. Mo has a question. What is your advice? Oh, this is a good question. What is your advice to an amateur guitar builder? Stick to one design and perfect it, or add variety to the builds? That's a pretty good question.
Yeah. Well, I would probably say stick to one design and perfect it. And then once you perfect it, you can move out from there. It's just that with guitar making, there's so many inputs or interactions and confounding factors. If you start changing a bunch of things right away, then it's almost impossible to know, what difference you're making, why this guitar sounded this way and this one sounds another way. So if you want to learn about that part of guitar making, then I would stick to one design and evolve it and make very small tweaks. If you're, just want to have fun and experiment, that's great too. But I'd say, yeah, the big difference for me in terms of acquiring knowledge about guitars would be to stick to one design.
Good. And that was my son you just saw come down in the background here. There's the camera right there. Okay, you heading off to work? Okay. Okay. All right. So my son's not going to work. He's going to be here with us. So if anything goes wrong, he's here on the job to help us out here. Let's see. Classical back braces. This is kind of back to that question on live backs. I'm combining the mahogany for the bottom part of the brace, and for the top part, I glue an ebony strip about 4 millimeters high. Do you think it is good to make stiffer braces this way?
So if I understand the question correctly, there's a mahogany brace and it has an ebony cap on the top of it.
That's what I understood, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that will make a stiffer brace. If anything, just because of the glue joint. You could probably glue another cap of mahogany on top of that.
Right.
And the glue joint would tend to stiffen it up.
Ebony would look cool though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would look great. It would look great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's a good way to stiffen up braces if that's what you want to do. Right. Whether you want to do that or not just depends on how stiff you want your back to be.
Yeah, and back to that, if you want to study more about the live back or the non-live back that Michael mentioned a little bit ago, go get Trevor Gore's books and read up on that. He'll explain the why and the how. Rob McAllister has built 2 ukuleles with Bacardi wood. Oh, today's Sunday, Bacardi wood, right? And they sound great. Jeff has a question about kaya wood, Kaaya, I believe.
Yeah.
Do you find kaya and sapelli to be on par with Honduras and Central American or Brazilian mahoganies? You got any experience there, Michael?
Yeah, I don't. They're fine woods in their own right, but they're not really quite equivalent. They can look similar, but kaya, in my experience, has always been heavier and more ribbony than, say, the Central American or South American mahoganies.
Right.
So, I'm a little spoiled. I'm used to carving necks out of genuine Honduran mahogany. And I find that, for me, I would use kaya when I run out of Honduran mahogany, if that tells you anything.
Perfect. Okay. Patrick, this is going to lead us in a different direction. I'm going to pull up your website here in just a second, Michael, and talk a little bit about that. But Patrick says, Michael,
Sure.
Your headstock designs are a true work of art. And yes, they are if you've never seen them. My question is, do you use a fret saw or a powered scroll saw to cut out the intricate little pieces? Thanks much. Now, I'm going to try and switch screens here, and hopefully I don't screw anything up. Let's see what I can do here. And let me find of course, my mouse has stopped. Okay, I'm going to pull up Michael's website. Oh, I did it. Look at that. Okay, and then I'm going to go to gallery and I'm going to pull up headstocks, and all the viewers will be able to see what we're talking about here. There.
Well, maybe while you're doing that, I could answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
I've got them on the screen now, so if you want to talk about any of that, I'll just kind of scroll down here as we look through them.
Sure. So first of all, thank you, Patrick. That's very kind of you. I appreciate that. My techniques have evolved over the years. I've never used a powered scroll saw to make my headstock overlays. When I first started, it was just a handheld scroll or fret saw, scroll saw. Is that the right terminology? The big C-shaped saw. So just for traditional inlay work. And then when I had symmetrical designs, I started to make little kind of half templates that I would just route out the symmetrical parts of the design. And then eventually that evolved into some more CNC work. So it's really changed over the years how I've done it. And there's been a couple designs where, I feel like definitely I've reached the limits of my hand skills to do it. And, so I'm taking advantage of some of the CNC technology to pull off some of the designs that I do. But a lot of them that I have done Especially when I started, was just traditional handwork. So I should say that I'm looking at the screen, Robbie, and there's a couple headstocks with heavy pearl inlay.
Right.
Yeah, and
I just got out of that screen, by the way.
okay.
Go ahead.
And just to be clear, those inlays were done either by Jimmy Wingert, who I've worked with over the years, or Harvey Leach. And pearl inlay is not my strength or forte. And there's inlay artists who are just do astounding work, like Jimmy and Harvey. And if a customer wants something really intricate on the headstock, I'm happy to work with them to do it.
Perfect. I've gone back to your website here. I'm going to flip back over to the website here. And I'm going to talk about some of the end grafts that Michael does. And you guys will be able to see that those are also works of art. Look at some of the end graft stuff. And I assume that's done the same way as your headstock designs?
Yeah, although mostly the very first one, that's really kind of curvy.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that was the first one I ever did once I really started getting a little more creative with the designs. And that was all done by hand. I have a series of scribes that I've made out of Japanese saw blades where I inlay those lines, and then you can see it's a symmetrical design. So again, I'm a little trick for that is I'll take two thin pieces of wood, I'll tape them together with double stick tape, and then I'll sand or cut or carve them together, and then I'll pop that in a microwave. It softens the adhesive of the double stick tape. The two pieces, which are thin and fragile, these are only typically about 60 thousandths thick, so you got to be careful when you're handling them. They easily come apart, and that's how I was able to achieve some of the symmetry, just using hand methods. So,
yeah, beautiful work. And there's also something else I wanted to show here, Michael. And that's your sand shading technique.
mm-hmm.
And what would be the best picture for that? Would that be a rosette?
Yeah, probably a rosette.
Okay, let me see if I can pull up a rosette here.
Something
Michael has
there.
a really cool technique, and I think I first met you, Michael, 20 years ago or so, at one of the Colorado Luthier Group meetings, and you were discussing the sand shading technique.
Mm-hmm.
So let me get back over here, and I'll pull that up. There we go. I think I've got it. The one there on the right, Michael, that shows up. It'll be showing up in your in a few seconds. There it goes. That's some sand shading technique there, isn't it?
Yeah. So
you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. The sand shading is it's certainly not a new technique, and it's nothing that I thought of. It's just an old marquetry technique. How old, I don't know, but basically what you do is you take a very fine sand. You don't want to use coarse sand playground. If I think when I prepped it, what I did was I took a bunch of sand from my kid's sandbox. I didn't tell him, and I ran it through a very fine sieve. And the finer and more uniform the sand particles, the better. And you just put that in an iron skillet on a hot plate, and typically you want to put it on at least a medium, a high temperature, and then your little pieces of wood you dip in the sand. And because of the depth of the sand, in terms of how far it is away it's from the heat source, you get this kind of gradient that looks almost like a shading. It can add a three-dimensional effect. So in a lot of my rosettes where I have joints, I'll put just a little touch of sand shading on there to give it a little bit more of almost a three-dimensional quality with a little bit more visual interest in it. There are some other problems with the technique. It's not quite as straightforward than that as that, because when you take these thin pieces of wood, which are usually figured, and you heat them up enough to actually scorch them, they change shape dimensionally. So if you had a piece that fit really nice in your rosette, and then you do this shading technique and then go back to your rosette, it very well may not fit anymore. So you got to be prepared to, for a little bit of post sand fitting, a little bit of frustration there. And also I do find that if you sand, after you scorch the piece, I would often dip it in thin CA because it becomes very brittle, almost like charcoal. The point, is not to actually get it that far burnt, but in some cases you may want to. Over the years, I've lightened up my technique with the sand shading to make it a more subtle effect.
Yeah, and as you can tell there, folks, beautiful, beautiful work. I'm going to try and get back to our regular scene here. There we go. And heck, we've been here almost an hour, Michael. So I guess we better go ahead and get to the rest of these questions, or as many as we can here real quick, then let Michael
Sure.
get back to his family and his Sunday afternoon here. So let's just try and talk about a few more here. Do you have any problem with cracking in exotic ebony back and sides? I used to laminate the sides so the backs are more problematic. So you use any exotic ebonies? I know there's some out there that are just fantastic looking instruments, but what do you think?
I have made some ebony guitars. This would also go for rosewood guitars as well. If I have a back that is really brittle, say like Ziricote, often Brazilian, Indian rosewood wouldn't fall into that category. It seems to be pretty stable.
Right.
I'll actually pre-treat it with a very thin epoxy. So after the back is joined, I'll thin it out almost to its final working dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Say maybe leave it maybe 40 thousandths over, and I'll coat both sides with a pretty thin epoxy.
Right.
And let that dry for a couple days, and then I'll sand all it off.
Right.
And the idea is that if there's anything that's sort of incipient in the wood in terms of cracking or hairline cracks that you may not see, this can catch them in advance. And once you run it back through your sander, the wood looks exactly like it did before you did anything to it.
Right.
Some guitar makers I know, and I've done this, I've built a guitar and then just soaked the back in super glue. That also works. The fumes can be really bad. And it takes a little bit of elbow grease to clean up the CA, but that can give you some insurance. Also, depending on how much you thin out your backs, you can put some very thin reinforcement strips running cross grain in the backs. And when I say thin, I mean, 20, 30 thousandths. And it's almost like a little stitch that's running across the back. It doesn't provide any stiffness, so it doesn't really act as a brace. It just acts as a little bit of a check on the grain. If you do get a crack, it may prevent it from running, or hopefully will prevent a crack from happening in the first place.
Okay, on to the next one here. Michael, do you tap tune your tops? And if so, what note or notes are you looking for in a specific model of yours?
Okay, yeah, good question. I tap on guitars like everybody. I will admit to you that I don't always know exactly what I'm listening for, but generally, as Trevor Gore would suggest, I don't want them to lie on a scale tone. My smaller bodies tend to be around a G sharp, but not right on the scales tone, and then my larger bodies would either be closer to a G or an A. So that's generally the range that I'm in for the body tap tone.
So that's the body tap tone, not the top tap tone. I was going to ask you, is that before or after you glued on?
Yeah, I don't do any tapping before the top is on.
So your closed box is a G sharp then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Depending on the model.
Right. Okay. Let's see. I read a long, long time ago somewhere that a greater headstock angle can help with preventing buzzes on guitars with lower action. Some truth to that? What do you think?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't see why the action would necessarily have anything to do with it. It really has to do with just downward pressure at the nut.
Right.
So if you have a correct action at the nut, which would generally be on the low E string about 23 thousandths, grading down to around 16 to 18 on the high E, uh, and then you go through the nut slots. If you have 15, about a 15-degree headstock, that should give you more than ample downward pressure to prevent any type of buzzing.
Good.
On my slotted headstocks, I actually make them at a shallower angle, probably around 8 or 9 degrees. But because of the tuner configuration, they have to dive, right off the back edge of the nut to go around the posts of the strings.
Right.
So.
Okay. Here comes a tool question, Michael. Do you think, or do you guys think a benchtop jigsaw? He said jigsaw. I think he means bandsaw. Do you think a benchtop jigsaw or bandsaw would be good for Lutherie type work, or would you stick with a full size unit? I think he meant to say bandsaw.
Okay. I'd say get both. It's handy to have a small bandsaw, and it's handy to have a small bandsaw, right close to your bench, because often, you just need to make little curve cuts or wing off some pieces.
Right.
And for me, I have to go out to a separate part of my shop to turn on my bandsaw. And I have two bandsaws, one with a resaw blade and one with a 1/4-inch blade. The one with a 1/4-inch blade, it doesn't, a smaller version of it would be good. Although I do use it to cut out the profile of my tops and backs, so I need enough clearance to do that.
Right. Tony has it looks like a question for my son Thiago. My son Thiago has left the building here. Can Thiago explain what delayed offsides is? Well, that happens to be a hockey question. So I'm sure there's people here from Canada that can relate to the delayed offsides. But if Thiago happens to come back in, he's a hockey ref, by the way, so I'll let him explain that one if he ever comes back. Right now, I'm working on a maple neck for a classical guitar. Not very usual for a classical. Do you have any experience with maple necks? And your comments. Any experience with maple necks, Michael?
Yeah, I've made a couple over the years, but I've never made one for a classical.
Okay.
So I can't really comment on that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
I do find that the maple, not surprisingly, as I'm sure you know, is it's certainly harder to work. It takes a little bit more elbow grease. It is a closed pore wood, so you can cut out one step in finishing. It definitely will add some weight to the guitar. I'd say in terms of the tangible effect of tone, I would suggest that you probably get a little bit more clarity, maybe even a little bit more sustain out of a guitar with a maple neck because of where you're putting the mass in the guitar.
Good. Next question. Oh, here's a finish question. What type of finish, filler, and sealer do you prefer? That's a great question, Michael. What's your favorite finish these days?
My favorite finish is, well, first of all, I have no favorite finish. I don't like any of them, but
right.
I do have to finish my guitars. So I've been using nitrous cellulose lacquer, just a clear gloss from Cardinal, which I think is available outside the US, but I don't know globally how exactly the extent of its availability. I also use a sealer by Cardinal. It's not a nitro sealer. It's a 2-part poly sealer. And then for the filler, I'm using just a traditional oil paste filler.
Okay. Good. And we're getting to the end here, folks. I still have a little tip that I want Michael to talk about here that's presented in the fretwork course. So you guys are really going to like this. So let's wrap up the questions here real quick, and we'll hit that tip, and then we can let Michael get back to his Sunday here. A couple of questions about zero fret. John says he's a fan. What's your take? And another person, Elias, what are your thoughts about zero frets?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, they make perfect sense, but I don't use them.
Okay.
I mean, you could say that they make sense because you're going from like material to like material. So say you're playing on the first fret, and then you play the same string open. The the two notes are more likely to sound more contiguous, if you will, because you're going from fret to fret as opposed to fret to bone. There's in terms of the action, it's pretty easy if you have the right size fret wire to set it up. Again, it makes sense. I guess the things that might be a little bit more difficult about them would be setting the action individually on different strings if you want to do that. So there's some real advantages. I don't use them in my guitars, to be honest with you. It's kind of just something I never incorporated, but I think they make sense.
All right, perfect. I want to get just a quick tip here to leave everybody with a quick tip. And I asked Michael to grab. Did you grab that, Michael? The blocks.
Yep,
Okay.
I
So
got it.
what Michael's going to talk about is something that he presents in his fretwork course. And take it away, Michael. I'll let you explain what it is.
Okay. So what I showed Robbie in the fretwork course is that I use a kind of a hybrid method to put in my frets. So I rely pretty heavily at first on just tapping them in. I glue in my frets, not on all of my refrets or frets on new guitars, but on my custom guitars, I like to use hide glue for fretting. And I'll tap them in, and then I have a clamping block, just simply made with 3 dowels. You can make something like this in a couple minutes. And the first time I use it with a block plane, I'll kind of just rough in an arch. I'll put some sandpaper down on the board, and then fit this exactly to the region of frets that I'm fretting. And there's a couple of reasons I like this method, in that it's kind of infinitely variable. I do a lot of multi-scale guitars, and if I'm working with a static or stiff brass call, it doesn't always fit the radius of the fingerboard exactly because it's going across at an angle. And so something like this, I find that no matter what my radius is, and I do a compound radius and I mill in some differential relief between the bass side and the treble side, that I've just found this type of call to be able to handle all of those situations. And the tapping in combined with this call afterwards, I find that I have to do the least amount of, or really the ideal is to actually do no fret dressing afterwards. So I feel like my fretwork is better and more consistent using these methods.
Perfect. And here's a little plug for Michael's fretwork course. He just mentioned it there that ideally when he gets done putting his frets in, he wants to do no fret dressing. And he shows how to do that in the fretwork course. He also shows that hemispherical fret ends, and you don't want to be dressing those after they're in. So if you're interested in learning that method, go out to my website, o'brienguitars.com, and pull up Michael's fretwork course. There you have it. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for participating here. Let me just make sure I didn't leave anybody out. Everybody's saying thank you. That looks good. If you like this content and these types of things, I'm going to try and do more of them in the future, probably with a lot of the people that have done online courses with me. Heck, maybe we could even have Michael back sometime here in the future and talk about his neck reset course, because there's a lot of cool tips in there. So if you like this content, be sure to subscribe to the O'Brien Guitars YouTube channel. There's a big button. I mean, you're watching it on YouTube right now. Go ahead and click the subscribe button. And then also make sure you click on the bell icon, the notification icon. That way, anytime we go live, you'll know about it. And I always try and put out some type of newsletter or something a day or two earlier, so you know about it anyway. Well, thank you very much, Michael, for your time and taking away from your family here on this Sunday afternoon here in Colorado. And your shop is not in your house like mine is, so you actually had to go from your house down to your shop. So I certainly appreciate it.
That's all right. It's not too far away. I just want to say thank you, Robbie. Thanks for everybody who's listening in. To the gentleman from Korea, Anyan Haseo. I don't know if I said that correctly, but that's the best I can do right now. So thank you again, and everybody stay safe and well.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Over and out.